then why would it be relevant? That's the very thing that makes it relevant, is analogous facts and circumstances to inform the expert's opinion as he opines on issues that pertain to the facts and circumstances of this case, which make it relevant under 402 and the charge conduct in the indictment. That is the very thing, well, Butch is saying you're ruling correctly, but that is the very thing that makes it relevant.
He can refer to the facts and circumstances of the federal case without
I want to be clear because he needs to be clear.
Yes.
Yeah, I won't mention the case name or the judge, but
I'm not concerned necessarily about just the case name, but Your Honor, are you giving him authority to talk about, there was a case in which 3 officers were accused of shooting a woman in her apartment who charged them with a hammer, the facts of this case, and the ruling was such.
That's a prior case. It is another case. It was in a different jurisdiction. He can refer to that as part of his testimony as an expert in this case.
So tell me with respect to the cases that you've read that have applied Graham v. Connor, that you believe informs the jury or helps the jury in making a decision on this case.
I'm not sure what you're asking, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You want a list of cases? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm asking what do you propose to talk about the facts in particular cases you've read and how the federal courts have ruled on those?
In this particular case, yes, but in the other cases as well. The cases that we're going to be talking about and the cases that I rely on as an expert give an overall legal theory of how the objective reasonableness is supposed to be determined. Graham versus Connor was not a win for the police in that particular case. It was simply a determination of how the courts and how we are supposed to review use of force from a reasonable person's objective standpoint. And all of the cases that we refer to, and I'm sure you know as an expert, I'm not going to rattle cases off the top of my head because we rely on research to do that, but all of the cases that follow that rely on that legal reasoning about what objective reasonableness is and what the standard is to determine whether or not the officer's actions were reasonable under those circumstances. So I will be saying that there are other cases out there that follow the Graham versus Connor decision, and in this particular case, they followed the Graham versus Connor decision. In that particular decision that I referenced, they did determine that it was reasonable. They did determine that the officers did not act excessively and their actions were reasonable, as well as that an exigency existed in this particular case.
Are you prepared in discussing about the case if these facts that were discussed in federal court and the ruling was made in federal court, that it only that it only applies to two of the individuals? Are you aware of that?
I'm aware that it only applies to 2 of the individuals. However, what we're looking at here is the reason that it only applies to 2 individuals is because one of them wasn't included in the suit. He's still charged under the same premises as the other officers were, and that charging relates to his actions and his conduct at that particular scene. And because those actions are interrelated with these defendants, then the or was
Subjective and objective belief is different. It's unique for each person. Would you agree?
No, when we're talking about determining use of force, absolutely. There is a subjective belief of the officers at the scene at that particular time, and that's the reason they did that action. What we do in the analysis under Graham and in any analysis that we're looking at whether or not the officers' cases or our actions were reasonable is now we conduct an objective reasonableness determination to find out, given their decision, now let's look at all of the facts and circumstances that existed that made that decision reasonable. And I think that's what the court did in this case.
In the trainings that you give officers across the state, do you also incorporate policies, police departments have incorporated for purposes of instructing their law enforcement personnel on how to protect themselves from liability and how to protect themselves from criminal charges.
I do include examples. As a matter of fact, my most recent case, or my most recent class that I taught, I included policies from the San Antonio Police Department and the Kendall County Sheriff's Office as an example of what some policies could look like and what policies may be. Obviously, policy is subjective because it's different for every agency across the state. They're allowed to set their own standards. So that example is used in my classes, but the class itself and the trainings that I teach deal with this is what the Supreme Court says, and in determining reasonableness, this is the Texas standard under Chapter 9, and all of that is included in the class material.
And why is that relevant? Your training and how police are trained, how is that relevant to whether or not objectively they had an ordinary and prudent person would have felt a particular way confronted with certain circumstances?
Officers need to know, and they need to be taught, and matter of fact, that's the whole purpose for use of force training that TCO requires, and any use of force training that a department gives. They need to understand what the standards are, or they need to be taught what the standards are in their use of force, and that it needs to be reasonable. It's a very extreme example, but we don't want to go out and tell officers, here's a gun, go out and use it however you want to. No, these are the conditions in which use of force would be justified, your actions would be justified, and I actually teach that and it is an accepted fact that anytime an officer uses force, anytime any citizen uses force in Texas, by statute, it is an offense. But the officers need to understand that while that is an offense, your actions can be justified if these conditions are met. So you need to understand what it takes to be reasonable as well as justified in the actions that you take. And I'm sorry, Ben,
Judge, I believe at this point in time, we're getting beyond the scope of the 705 hearing. I believe this witness has well established his qualifications, and this area of inquiry is beyond the scope of 705 and is actually getting into the area of cross-examination.
I don't believe it has been up to this point, but I am through. I am after his last answer, comfortable with what we've asked him.
Okay.
Judge, the state of the evidence is very clear. Lieutenant Jacob Butch is highly qualified, and he has sufficient facts and data, reliable principles and methods, and a lifetime of training, longer than my lifetime, to be honest. And he has applied them reliably to the facts and circumstances of this case, and he is entitled to render expert opinions in use of force, reasonable officer standard, and any of the other topics that might come up, with the exception of the policy explanation. Should that come up on cross-examination, obviously we'll have to reapproach on that issue as has become the practice in this court.
Okay.
And Your Honor, one last minor point. I want to make clear that in our joint defense agreement, we, on Eleazar Alejandro, two of our experts were Lisa and Butch Macheca, but in the interest of economy, we're agreeing to allow Jason Goss and Thomas Nisbet to conduct the direct. So I just want to make that clear, and I'm wondering if the court could so inform the jury as part of the joint defense agreement.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Your Honor, as we discussed yesterday, the state would like, and the way this goes, is to do our cross-examination after they've all completed their direct examination.
Okay, we'll do that.
In fact, I got no objection to him testifying.
it's up to you. I can do it or you can do it.
Very good. All rise for the jury.
be seated.
All right, welcome back, members of the jury. Defense?
Your Honor. We'll do it once. Lieutenant Majeka, could you introduce yourself to the members of the jury, please?
My name is Thomas Majeka. Thomas is my given name, but since I was about 4 years old, I've been called Butch. So you're probably going to hear me referred to as Butch.
May I call you Butch?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Butch, how are you presently employed?
Currently, I'm the lieutenant of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Kendall County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. How long have you been with Kendall County?
I've been with Kendall County for 13 years.
And could you detail for the members of the jury some of your responsibilities in Kendall County?
My responsibilities in Kendall County to oversee the criminal investigations that are conducted by my office. I still actively investigate criminal investigations myself, but I oversee the investigations conducted by my investigators to make sure that they're thorough, that they're objective, and they're complete, that all of the elements of the offenses are met, and then those cases are filed with the district attorney's office.
When did you begin your career in law enforcement?
In 1977.
Okay. And what agency? Members of the jury through your service with SAPD, please.
I started in, again, 1977, went through the police academy. When I graduated, I was assigned to patrol, and I served as a patrol officer for 10 years. Half of that time, 5 years, I was a field training officer for new probationary officers that were coming out of the academy. I worked the south side, southeast, and southwest sides of San Antonio on dog watch. Love nights. It's the best shift in the world. But in about 1988, when I left and went to the training academy, I became the lead instructor for all the criminal law courses. I specialized in arrest, search, and seizure, code of criminal procedure, some other courses as well, family code, juvenile code. So I taught a lot of the legal courses that were there. I did a number of things while I was there. I was an assistant tactics instructor. You can't tell it now, but I was actually in. But I did a lot of different jobs, but primarily my position was teaching the legal courses there. I did that for almost about 6 years, and then I promoted to detective and was assigned to the homicide unit and was assigned to the murder section. Murders, officer-involved incidents, use of force cases, any death investigation that came up, much like Detective Duke that you heard from. We investigated any death investigation that was there, and I did that for 10 years. In 1994, I was assigned to the officer-involved shooting team. We had a small unit of about 6 officers that specialized in officer-involved cases. Eventually, I became the lead investigator. And went back to patrol for a very brief period of time, about two and a half years. And I was requested to come back to the homicide unit as a supervisor. And I went back again, supervising murders and attempted murders, officer-involved shootings, and overseeing all of those investigations and actively participating in those investigations as well. How far do I?
Are we still at SAPD?
We're still at SAPD.
Keep going.
While I was at SAPD, yeah, I'm going to need it. In criminal justice with a minor in legal studies. That involved studying substantive criminal law, constitutional law, and legal research and writing, becoming more proficient in the legal aspect of all of the classes and jobs that I was doing. In 2007, I obtained a master's degree in justice policy from the University of Texas at San Antonio, and passed my thesis. I did that for 7 years. I taught Introduction to Forensic Science, legal issues in forensic science, violent crime, contemporary police practices, and trial and evidence. And after about 34 years, I had a family issue that needed to be addressed, and I needed some money to help my family, so that was my decision to retire after 34 years there.
to start collecting on the SAPD pension.
Yes,
Okay. But work didn't stop there.
it did not.
Where'd you go next?
I lasted off for about 2 weeks before I was called by Cliff Herberg, who was then the first assistant district attorney at Bear County District Attorney's Office, and I was asked to come to work for them. I became an investigator for the district attorney's office here, and I was assigned to the family violence section. My duties were to prepare cases that were indicted and unindicted, violent felony crimes against individuals for prosecution. I did that for 2 years. I was also part of the Capital Crimes Committee with the District Attorney's Office, and that was their committee that reviewed death penalty cases to determine whether or not a death penalty was an appropriate charge at that time. While I was with the District Attorney's Office here, I received a call from an old partner of mine that I worked with in San Antonio, who asked if I would come out and head up the Criminal Investigation Division with the Kendall County Sheriff's Office, and decided to go back to investigations, and that's how I began my career with Kendall County. So 47 years in total.
You know how old I am?
42.
Not 47.
I won't say anything. I was doing this job before you even thought of it.
Twinkle in my daddy's eye. Could you tell the members of the jury if you hold any special certifications?
I do hold special certifications. I have a certification as a medical legal death investigator because of my background in murder investigations and death investigations. I decided to go into that particular specialty, and what that does is it gives us a much greater insight what basically the medical investigators for the medical examiner's office does. It allows us a better understanding of how to investigate death scenes and the evidence and signs of death that we see at these scenes, and understand what's going on. The body reacts and what happens after death occurs, to give us a better understanding of what we're doing. I also went to, there's an agency called the Force Science Institute. They are a nationally recognized agency that deal with use of force investigations. Their focus is on understanding and explaining how things happen with officers, the perception and the attention and the memory issues and the context and the human performance issues of what officers encounter while shooting an investigation or a critical incident also involves shooting. And it gives us an understanding of why things is to determine whether or not the justification for that use of force existed. I obtained their basic certification in 2004, I believe, and in 2016 was the basic in certification. I went back in 2024 and obtained their advanced certification in force analysis. So that is the highest certification that they offer. And so those are some of the certifications I have.
Moving next to what did you review in this case in preparation for today's testimony?
In preparation for today's testimony, I reviewed all of the information that was provided in the discovery packet from the District Attorney's Office. That included police reports, statements, witness statements, officer-involved statements, body-worn camera, all related documentation from any individuals who wrote reports in this particular case that had something to do with it. I reviewed CPS reports from Ms. Perez, some of the past calls that have been made by made on Ms. Perez. I reviewed every document that basically existed in this particular case. In addition to that, because I was going to be asked to form an opinion on whether or not the officer's use of force was justified in this case, I continue to review the case law that existed on how to form that opinion about whether the officer's actions were reasonable or justified under Texas code as well as the federal standards as well. So I reviewed all of the case law in any cases that involved or similar to this particular case as well.
And for the members of the jury, the statutes, right?
The Chapter 9 statutes in the Penal Code, yes.
The case law, the science behind use of force that you're certified in?
Yes.
These are all topical areas you teach in as well.
Yes, sir. I've been teaching that, as I said, since 1992.
And if members of the jury saw you listening to all the evidence throughout trial and they heard from, say, Detective Platt, you're the individual that teaches those courses.
Yes, sir.
Do you have an opinion on whether Detective Platt paid attention in that course?
Based on her testimony, she didn't incorporate much of what we taught.
Okay, now, all of the reliable principles and methods that you have learned and studied and obtained throughout your entire career, did you apply those in your analysis to the fact into them yet? Have you reached expert opinions about the topics we're going to talk about in front of this jury?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In preparing your analysis, did you create anything to help the jury understand some of the significant points throughout the critical incident that you reviewed?
I did.
And what did you create?
I created a PowerPoint presentation from stills from the body-worn camera images that you've seen and you're going to see, as well as an analysis of the content of the conversations and the comments that were made in this incident.
And would utilizing that PowerPoint help explain and put into context your testimony to the members of the jury?
Yes, sir.
Judge, we'd ask as a demonstrative, we be entitled to publish his PowerPoint as we walk through his presentation.
Okay.
Do you want the clicker, or do you want me to work it?
Why don't you work it, because you'll control the questions.
Okay, all right. So, I think the members of the jury have a pretty solid understanding of the call for service and the things that happened on June 23rd of 2023. What I want to focus on is your analysis of significant events in going into a use of force analysis. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So your very first slide here, Robert Ronald's body cam screen grab. Please tell the jury the significance of why you put this slide up there.
I included this slide in there because in the review of the material that I was provided, especially the arrest warrant affidavits and Detective Soto's report, there was a lot made, a lot of comments made or implications made that the window in this particular case was obstructed, that the officers, or she never really had an opportunity to harm the officers because there was an obstructed, a television there obstructing that window that prevented her from doing so. I included this photograph to show that she is standing in the window, in between that television and the window itself, and this gives you a pretty good example of there is no obstructive there. And so those comments that the window was obstructed and she could not have harmed the officer, no reasonable officer would believe that she could have harmed them because of that, was inaccurate. The second part of this that I included in here is we're talking about the officer's reasonableness in trying to arrest her without using force. Up to this point, at this particular timestamp on the photograph that you're looking at, up to this point, officers have asked her to come out of her apartment and talk, or come out of the apartment so that they can talk to her at least 7 times, and she has said no on every one of those occasions. In addition, she's mentioned the fact that you need a warrant 5 times up to this particular point. Now, the question about the warrant being included in there and whether or not a warrant was necessary is not really what her intent was. And the reason that I included this was because we can determine, based on what she said, what her intent about mentioning that warrant is. And the content and context of these remarks is clear because, if you'll hit the next area, at 101:45, she makes the comment, "I'm not going to get arrested." You'll hear that on the video. At 102:13, she makes the comment, "I'm not coming out." And then again at 102:15, the reason that I tell you that her mentioning the warrant is in the context of her refusing to be arrested is because she actually says it. At 102:15, she says, "You ain't got no warrant. You can't come in for me." It wasn't a question of whether or not she thought we could go in her house without a warrant or not. She was making the comment that we couldn't go in her house for her to arrest her.
Moving next to a screen grab from Jonathan Salinas' body-worn camera at 1:40:50. What's the significance of this, Butch?
What's missing in especially in some of the investigative reports by Detective Soto, what's missing in the warrant that was included or that was applied for in this particular incident is the fact that determining whether or not the officer's use of force is reasonable is also based on the actions of the individual who was resisting that particular arrest and offering force against us. There's no mention in a number of reports about Officer Salinas being assaulted twice before the candle was thrown at him in that particular situation. So I included this in here to show you that. And there was also some mention by the state is it wasn't visible on camera. You didn't see it on camera. Well, looking at the body-worn camera, you can actually look up in this little circled area here, and if you look, see her hand, okay, coming forward toward, and it is in front of the television. You can actually, if you look real close, you can see 4 fingers of her hand that are in front of that particular television. And this is really all that we can see on the body-worn camera. And there's a reason for that. You know, the body-worn camera records its video at 30 frames per second. But the human eye and the brain process that movement much faster. So we see things happening in a much faster area, but the camera itself makes decisions. The algorithm that's in the camera software actually makes decisions about what frames it's going to include in that 30-second or that 30 frames second. So it will look smooth as it's played to you. You'll actually see it looks smooth playment, but there's a lot of things that are missing because the speed of the camera that it's recording at is not picking this up. You can actually see this in the body-worn camera that you've been provided and that you'll look at. When one of the shots are being fired, you can see fire coming from the barrel of the weapon. But in another, when the other barrel, and that's because the camera is looking for redundant images to eliminate to get it down to that 30 frame per second category to keep that size of the video manageable. So we're able to get 1 frame realistically of Melissa Perez with swinging that hammer for the first time at Officer Salinas, and this is all we can see, but we know it happened. Not only because other officers saw it, but we do have body-worn image camera that will show that.
Would this be a known limitation on body-worn cameras to experts in the industry?
It is. It's one of the limitations. The other limitation, of course, is distance, which is something Detective Soto testified to. He said when he looked at the body-worn camera, it didn't appear that Melissa Perez was that close. But anybody who understands body-worn cameras and who teaches use of force, because this is one of the things we want people to be aware of and officers to be aware of, is the limitations on body-worn camera with the software, the algorithms, the curved lenses, the quality of the lens that's being used will create distortion. For example, if you were to take your phone out right now and point it at me and take a picture, and then look at me sitting here and then look at that picture on your phone, I'm going to look farther away. So by Detective Soto analyzing that body-worn camera and saying, well, to me it didn't look like she was really that close, you got to understand that to these individuals who were standing there, that action and that person was so much more closer than it was depicted on the body-worn camera. So that is a limitation that has to be considered in any investigation.
And is there a way during your investigative process to gain more information between those gaps of frames or between those distortions from witnesses at the scene?
Absolutely, and that's really the only way that you're going to get that information, because we know the camera might not capture it all without understanding that it is recording, but it's not capturing everything. The best way to get that information is from witnesses who are actually standing there and seeing it at a faster speed, because our eyes and our brain function and process that information much more quickly.
Hey, Ben, can you hold up this with your left hand? Hold up, but do this with your left hand. Okay. She was this close.
Yes, they're much more capable of seeing that than in live testimony than they are in the body-worn camera.
Okay, next slide, 140/50. Again, so we're inside of the same second frame of Jonathan Salinas' body-worn camera. What did you find significant here?
Here, as you said, we're still in that same second of the attack, and you can see her fist is no longer in front of the camera, or in front of the television, and you can see that the arm is beginning to pull back. This is just the beginning of that cocking, and if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see that here and now we've got her arm pulling back in this particular fashion. She's preparing again for another swing, simply because we've talked about our Officer Salinas being swung at twice with that hammer, or occurring twice. This image shows the preparation for that second swing. Again,
1 second later, what's the significance?
the significance in this video is there are a number of things here that we need to pay attention to. The first thing is, again, that obstructive, the claim by the investigator that this window was obstructed, so it's not reasonable to believe that Melissa Perez could harm an officer. This is the second swing from Officer Salinas' body-worn camera, and if you can see, her arm is outside of that window. The hammer is outside of that window, and respectfully, Mr. Harris made the comment that he thought the window screen was knocked out when Officer Salinas pushed it through. We can actually see here that hammer is actually what's causing that window screen to be knocked out. But the point here is her capability of getting outside of this window to strike somebody who is in that vicinity is certainly objectively reasonable.
Moving 2 seconds later to 1:40:53, what was the significance here, Bush?
Here, again, we've had 2 swings, 2 attacks on Officer Salinas already, but in this particular case, it doesn't appear that Melissa Perez is willing to stop the attacks. She's actually backing up. She's pulling back with her arm again and maybe preparing for a third strike, but the only reason to pull back like this is to threaten the officer that about to be attacked. And of course, if we look at Chapter 9, when we're talking about the justification to defend ourselves against another's use of unlawful or attempted use of unlawful force, that word attempted use is in there as well. It's not just the actual attacks, but it's the attempted attacks on us that provide that justification as well. So here she's preparing for at least another strike in this particular frame. And if you'll go to the next slide. I'm sorry, up to this point. Now, even during the attacks on Officer Soto, we're still asking her, come outside. Please come outside and talk to us. She's now refused that verbally 8 times, and she's now told us 9 times that we need a warrant to come in to arrest her. That was the whole purpose of us. And she has no intent to be arrested. That, I think, is clear from Officer Salinas telling her, you're going to get shot. And her response was, shoot me. I don't care. I mean, she didn't say I don't care, but that's the message that's being sent. Shoot me if you want to. As that's go ahead.
We have some things to talk about on this one. So at 1:40:55, Jonathan Salinas' body camera. What was significant to you in this frame?
In this particular frame, again, this is just a few seconds or a second or so after she's cocked that hammer back. And I say that she's intending to swing again because she moves from that position between the window and the TV in the photo. She moves from that position behind that small wall that's right there. And you can actually see her peeking around the corner with that hammer cocked back. And to me, that shows the intent to continue that attack. I'm looking for another target. If you're there, I'm going to hit you. That's the only purpose for moving back and taking that, we'll call it a tactical position, to protect her from the officers getting to her, but also to launch another attack against the officer.
Is it significant at all that she is taking these positions with a firearm being held by a full-duty police officer being pointed in her direction?
It is.
And why?
It's significant because who is refusing to come out because she knows she's going to get arrested. Taking these tactical, you know what? I'm old. I forgot you. I forgot where I was going.
I don't want to miss any flow. Something new, okay? Did you count the number of panels on that wall up to where Melissa Perez center mass would be?
I did, and yeah. So if you count them from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 would be the exact position of Melissa Perez. You can see that she's she's bent over just a little bit in this particular photo. But if she was standing up behind this wall, then you would see that center mass for her would be right at number 6. And that'll come in importance a little bit later on in the presentation when you see where some of these gunshots went. But standing up at that area, that is where she's actually trying to hide and not be subject to that any attack by the officers on their part.
Next slide, 14105, Jonathan Salinas. What do you got for us here, Bert?
This is it's a still shot, but if you were to look at this in a little bit faster, a couple of slides at all, you can actually see this is right after she picks up the candle. Again, her intent is not to go back to jail. Her intent is to attack the officers, because she stops attacking with the hammer, goes back and continues to yell at the officers, but then picks up an object for no other reason than to throw it at the officers and try and hit them with it, because we know that's exactly what she does. From this frame forward, now she starts to come forward with that particular attack.
Okay. Next frame, 14110 on Jonathan Salinas' body worn cam.
Here we see her arm cocked and she's ready to throw that candle out the window. Again, this shows that that window was not obstructed, and her actions in being able to get to a police officer and cause injury if she could, that she's perfectly able to do that. And her arm is cocked back, indicating here comes the next attack on Officer Salinas. Again, by this time, she's now refused to come out 9 times. She's verbally refused to come out 9 times by saying no. And she's also now reminded us that I'm not coming out to get arrested 11 times based on her comments about you need a warrant.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about why this was significant here.
Okay. In this particular case, again, as I put up here, clearly there's no obstruction of the window as Officer Salinas is assaulted with the candle. And looking at the reasonableness standard, okay, and Detective Soto saying that or even the administration or the state saying that no reasonable person would believe that Melissa Perez was capable of harming them because of that obstructed window or because of that wall that was between the officers and the officers on the patio. If you look very closely at this, you can see in the corner where is outside that window. And just from the position of where her arm is, we're looking at an arm length of about 2 feet, okay? Now add that hammer into that particular arm reach, and her arm reach goes at least, if not farther, to the trim of the door, indicating that window and that wall provide absolutely no protection for an officer who's there. But now we're looking at that 6 feet area of the patio itself. And so we know that she's capable of coming out at least 2 feet without just leaning completely outside the window, which we've seen she's capable of doing. But she's also able to come out that window at least 3 feet or more to where the officer or throwing that hammer at the officer standing there. Now take into consideration and remember that patio is only 6 feet wide. Okay, and so from where that rail is to where the officer is standing, unless he's backed up against that particular rail, okay, even with his body width, we're talking at least a foot in front of that rail. So add that foot there and 3 feet to Melissa's reach. We're down to 4. There's only this much distance between Melissa Perez and the officer if they're as back as far as they can be. If that officer was anywhere close to throw, as she did the candle, as you know, Officer Chernak made the comment, is she Ryan Nolan? Well, we've already seen how accurately she can be with that candle. Now she can be just as accurate with this hammer, given the time and distance that we have in that particular space.
Next slide, still Salinas, 14143. Why is this significant?
It goes back to, and I don't know if we want to talk about this yet, but it is something that comes into play when we're talking about Melissa Perez's intent and what was going to happen as a result of this particular action. She's here establishing, again, her intent not to come back. As you look at the body-worn camera, okay, and look at the officer's interaction with Melissa, as well as Melissa's interaction with the officers at the times that there's no attacks going on. You'll notice that there's no profanity used by the officers. Nobody's, and I did apologize, I didn't include the profanity in this slide for shock value. I included it for a specific reason, and this is really the only way to show it. I won't use the term, but I want you to be able to see it. Police officers, and matter of fact, anybody will use profanity at certain stressful times to give an intent or a more determination of what it is that you're talking about. It makes you more aggressive. It makes you more positive that this is going to happen. So when the officers tell Melissa, we're going to get you, Melissa, which means we're going to come in and arrest you, and adding that expletive, adding that profanity on there adds an emphasis, and Melissa is actually adding an emphasis to the officers, letting them know this is my intent. I'm not coming out. She doesn't do it just once. They tell her again, you're going to get tased. And then she replies again, I don't give a, tase me. Okay, so her intent is being emphasized to these officers. I'm not cooperating. I'm not coming out. You're not going to arrest me. There's nothing you can do to change that.
I guess just to put a pin in the PowerPoint for just a moment and sort of transition to, is actively resisting, members of the jury have heard this term. Essential elements you consider in what the reasonable officer standard is.
It is. In the cases that we reviewed and the decisions that have come down about use of force, one of the factors that the courts looked at is one of the main three factors they look at is is the suspect actively not only actively resisting, but threatening harm to somebody else or another at that particular time. So those two are in conjunction. But she's certainly actively resisting verbally, but we also see her.
Okay, next slide. We're going to do some measuring tape work on this one. 151, 53. This is Maria Salinas body cam. Why is this significant?
This is going to be significant, again, because it goes back to the investigation that was done here in Detective Soto's premise that when I saw what on the video, it didn't look that close to me. Well, the reality is how close does it have to be? Officer Villalobos' entire upper body is in this window. So we're going to do a measurement here to show you how much that is. But now add on, again, that 3 feet of reach that Melissa Perez had, given her arm and defending her body position, can be even more than that. Add that to the equation and you can see she really doesn't have to be that close, distance-wise, perception-wise, to actually cause injury to the officer.
Do you know how tall Lug is, Bush?
5 foot something.
He'd be happy if you rounded up. Can we use the gentleman's hand over here? Josh, can we use the wall for demonstration?
Yes.
Thank you. You want to step down, Butch?
Sure.
Bring the hammer, please. All right, gentlemen, back up for me. Man of the hammer, Butch? Sure. I'm going to give the hammer to Alejandro, who is about the same height as me. And just extend the hammer up as if you were swinging it. V, I want you to bend at the waist, bend over like you're in the window that night. And then we'll say this close, okay? So I'm gonna go from, you wanna take the measure tape over there, Butch? I'm gonna go from V's butt. Tell me when you're there.
I'm here.
Okay, I'm touch your butt, sorry man, 74 inches. So that's 6 feet and 2 inches of total distance. Is that a significant factor in the visibility of this body camera angle, which we see partially obstructed by the rail?
It is. With him being inside there, she has that 6 feet 2 inches reach to be able to injure him, and how quickly that individual can close rule. But in about a second and a half, that 21 feet, that second and a half, you can cover about 21 feet. And so how quick, in a second and a half, to get to the back of that, the couch where it was, is about 14, 16 feet. She's there that quickly to be able to, I only need 8 feet to get to where Officer Villalobos is leaning in through the window. I can cover that 8 feet in less than a second.
Okay, next slide. Villalobos body worn camera at 151:52. What's significant here?
I included this because the significance in determining reasonableness is partially based on what an officer believed at that particular time. And you've heard the testimony that Officer Villalobos reached in and he thought that he unlocked the door. He actually physically did. If you listen to it, you can hear the click in the video of him unlocking the door. And then, of course, Melissa Perez comes at him. So in his mind, he thought he unlocked the door. He actually told other officers that, and everybody there at that particular time believed that the door was unlocked. And again, it's a dishonest statement to put in the affidavit for arrest warrant and the investigative reports that were done, and any report that was done, as that she was shot from behind a locked door. That is a factual statement, but that's not the way that the standard is investigated. It's what did the officers believe at that time, and was that belief reasonable under the circumstances? Well, how can it not be reasonable when an officer physically unlocks a door and tells everybody that it's unlocked? So the reasonableness of their actions here based on their attempting to go in is why I included this particular slide. As well as, I think there's some text on this, unless you've got.
Okay.
And again, up to this point, by the time Officer Villalobos tries to go into, I will tell you that I broke this down from the time that the original officers got to the scene and asked her to come out, and she made those comments. But then I broke it down from how many times she made the comments after these officers arrived on the scene. But up to this point where Officer Villalobos is now entering there, she's been asked to come out 20 times and she said no. And she's told us that you're not going to arrest me 25 more times because she believes that we needed a warrant. Okay? So we're looking at 45 times up to this point where she has refused to come out and comply.
We see the discussion of that fact be established outside the rail. We see the officers take action based on that reasonable belief the door is unlocked. Door handle and then releases it. Is there any evidence that he communicates the belief or the new fact that the door is in fact locked?
No, there's not. As a matter of fact, he believed that the door was, and if I understand you correctly, he believed that that door was unlocked. Actually, the attack began and he reached to unlock the door. Again, we're talking about 1 second. And we talked a little bit about human performance issues. What happens to officers that are faced with a very quick and violent attack on them? What happens to the body? What happens to our mind and our perception is our sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and there are a lot of changes that happen in that very short period of time. Your heart rate can go from normal up to 240, 250 beats in less than a second. The body dumps huge amounts of adrenaline that's going to affect how you respond and how you react. And so when he tried to open that door and found that it wouldn't open and the attack is already beginning, then second, rationally understand why that door would not open. You can make all kind of assumptions. Did I not turn the handle far enough? Is it stuck? We don't know why it didn't open, but that startled and surprised him. And he didn't communicate that in all actuality because he still believed the door was unlocked.
Well, and I guess that's what I want to highlight for the jury is if you were Alejandro or you were Flores, was there any new updating information in that split second that your reasonable belief was now the door is locked?
There was not. Alejandro and Flores, because they weren't, I can't say that they weren't paying attention to it, but obviously Alejandro was looking at Melissa Perez because she was coming, and Sergeant Flores, if you look at the video and capture his face on there, you know he's looking at Melissa Perez because she's coming. So they're not reacting to that, and nothing is said. So they don't have any clue that that door is locked and not opening. For some reason, it just didn't work.
Okay, next slide. Villalobos body cam 151-59. What do we do here?
I put this slide in here because there's been, again, when we're talking about a reasonable person standard, what would a reasonable person believe under those particular circumstances? And was their reaction justified? I don't want to make light, in looking at this and putting this photo in here, I remembered that as this trial kind of progressed, we've made an issue that Officer Villalobos was a Marine. Okay, and Marines are, they're guys. I mean, they're good at what they do, and they're supposed to be. They're brave. But the reality is, being a Marine, when you're faced with a deadly threat, this is the same reaction that a Marine would put out as anybody else, as any other person being attacked with deadly threat. It doesn't matter what your position is. It doesn't matter what your training is. It doesn't matter who you are. When you're faced with a deadly threat, you're going to react, especially Officer Villalobos, and how you've been trained. And his response to that fear, to that deadly attack, was to draw his weapon. And it's a reasonable response under these circumstances.
Moving next to 150, 157 on Maria Salinas body cam.
Maria, well, because we're talking about, again, a reasonable person standard. It's not just Officer Villalobos' opinion that there's a deadly attack coming, or an attack that could cause serious bodily injury. It's also the other officers who were at the scene. Maria Salinas is not a Marine, at least not that I know of, but with her response, I've got to draw to protect Officer Villalobos, or to prevent that attack from actually going through. So it is objectively reasonable to believe that anybody who is attacked with a deadly force, even a hammer, a blunt force object, and I can tell you, based on my investigations as a homicide detective, I've handled murders that have been committed with a hammer. I know the damage that can be inflicted. We all assume that damage, but I've seen it. So I tell you that when you're looking at that, was it objectively reasonable for them to believe this?
Next slide, Villalobos at 151.18.
This goes back to not only her refusal to come out, but it also tells you what's going on in her mind through this, to a degree, at least in this particular incident. They're having discussions about what they're going to do or what's going to happen. One of the comments made outside by the officers is, she's ready to fight. And the response to that, if you look at it, is listening to what you're doing. I know you're trying to arrest me. I'm not going to let you arrest me. And you know what? If you want to fight, bring it on. And that's what this particular message sends.
Maria Salinas, 151.26. What's significant here, Butch?
Again, we're talking about Miss Perez listening to the officers' conversations. What they're talking about at this particular point in this body cam footage is they're talking about beanbags, less lethal means of getting into the house, which, by the way, I'll tell you later if you are now. Where do you want?
We're going to go back to beanbags.
Yeah, we're going to go back to beanbags, and I'll tell you why it wasn't an option. But Melissa is listening to the officers' plans on how they're coming to get her. Because if you look at this particular area and listen to it on the body cams, in response to the officers discussing less lethal beanbags, you hear her say, and you actually kind of watch the video to actually hear it, to get the context. But what she does is, shotgun, and like, okay, I'm not worried about it. And it again established her intent is not to comply and not to come out.
Travis Thompson's body cam at 156 even. What's significant here, Butch?
I put this in here because, again, it shows there's a lot of maybe comments been made about de-escalation and the officers trying to get her to come out peacefully. They early on in this particular call that these guys had nothing to do with, but now we're trying to peacefully get her to come out of that particular car. You don't want to talk to me? I added this in there because Officer Thompson is now asking her to come outside again in a very calm, very de-escalating kind of way. And again, her response is, and I say that I can tell you why she's not coming out, what's in her mind. What's in her mind is expressed by the voices and the terms that she uses. Nope, she's not coming out because I'm going to get arrested and because I already know how this works.
Moving next to 159.06 in Thompson's body cam. What was significant here?
You'll hear Officer Thompson trying to reason with Ms. Perez and trying to get her to, and trying to understand, why are we here? Okay, let's calm this down a little bit. You tell me why you're here. Let's try and talk this out so we can resolve this peacefully. So tell me what happened. And again, we go back to Melissa Perez's state of mind. I was talking to the fire department. 2 officers came and disrespect me. They tried to arrest me, and I'm not having that pre-arrest, false arrest, or false accusation again. You know, even though you're rationally trying to speak with her, to get her to come outside and give up peacefully, she knows what's going to happen, and she's not going to have it.
So we move to 156.35. What happens then?
This is just another example of the officers trying to do this peacefully in the wording that they used. And Officer Alejandro, who's at the scene now, who started talking to Ms. Perez. So before this has to get complicated, can you please, I mean, we're asking her, please, can you please just come out so we don't have to use force or anything like that? Again, no, because I already know what's going to happen. Alejandro asked her, what's going to happen? And her response, like previously, I've been arrested for false accusations. I'm not having it anymore. You want me to come out so you can arrest me? And she says, I've done that 3 times. I've been arrested. I know what's going to happen. It's not happening this time.
What's the count at?
We're at 71 times. 23 times she's verbally told the officers, no, I'm not coming out. And 48 times she's told the officers that they need a warrant to arrest her, to come in and arrest her. So we're talking about 71 times that she's had an opportunity to come out, and she's refused to do that.
And again, this goes back to the significance of the resisting arrest and the level of resisting when it's considered in the objective officer standard.
Yes, sir.
Okay, 20206. What do we see here?
I didn't go too much. You've seen the video of the shooting multiple times. So what I decided to do here this particular time, he's still trying to get her to come out. As the officers or Officer Sergeant Flores and Officer Villalobos, he hasn't drawn his weapon because Melissa Perez is not armed. She's standing at the television with her hands over the television. We can see that she's not doing anything aggressive at that time. And so he's not being aggressive or taking any aggressive action at all. But when Officer Villalobos and Sergeant Flores go over that rail, okay, this is the point where he sees Melissa coming at the officers, and this is where he now begins to draw his gun in response to that threat that's coming.
Which I want to ask you about just a couple seconds before this, because what you said I think is significant. We've heard testimony about they can see the suspect's hands over the TV, and that was significant. We've heard testimony about going against an unarmed suspect is better than going against an armed suspect. But I want to talk about the significance of the pause. When Villalobos first mounts the rail, he pauses, and he's told to pause. Why?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. At the point at which
I do know, and I can tell you that during that pause, and when he did pause, that Sergeant Flores had still notified or still visualized that she was at the television with her hands over the television, and he's now telling Officer Villalobos to go. She's still unarmed. Let's get through the door. Let's get her under control before she can get to that hammer. I don't think the pause was significant in any way except for him going over and Sergeant Flores saying, we're still good because she's still unarmed and she's still right there. And because we think that door is still open, we're going to make it through and get her before she gets that hammer as an attempt to attack us.
Next slide, 20206. This time we're looking at Maria Salinas body-worn cam.
This is from Maria Salinas, and again, it was just an opportunity to show you that Melissa Perez had the opportunity to assault Sergeant Flores. We know because of how far she can get out that window, he's completely vulnerable at this time. Is it reasonable for another officer to believe that a sergeant who's going over the rail and an attack is coming? Is it reasonable to believe that that officer believes his sergeant is in danger of either serious bodily injury or death? And looking at his position, Sergeant Flores' position, as we said before, his back is to Melissa Perez. His back is to the door, not because he's trying or he's done anything tactically inappropriate. It's the only way to get over that rail. Even climbing over the rail, it's really not real easy to keep your head turned around. So you put your trust in the other officers that were there to protect me during that time. And that's what was happening here. Sergeant Flores is exposed. He's vulnerable, and Officer Alejandro sees the attack coming. You can see his arms coming up because he's already got in that shooting position.
Okay, next slide. Now let's talk about beanbags. This is a little bit blurry, but who is that on the left side of the frame?
On the left side of the frame, that's Sergeant Ed Rivera. He is the individual who had possession of the beanbag. And really, I think when we're talking about reasonableness, I need to point out that it's on the video. You'll be able to see it. You'll have to find it. But on the video, as Sergeant Flores is preparing his plan and getting his plan in motion. Okay, he actually instructs. Sergeant Rivera goes and gets the shotgun, and as he comes back, and before this plan is initiated, Sergeant Flores looks at Sergeant Rivera and asks him, "Can you get her from here? Can you take this shot from the position he's in?" Sergeant Rivera said yes. He's in the position he wants to be, armed with that less lethal shotgun. So he's there and ready to go. That other analysis of what other things could have been done, Sergeant Flores took those precautions and took those into consideration in forming his plan. The reason I included this photograph in here is to give you that perspective of, as Sergeant Flores is going over that rail and where his body is positioned, this is what his body-worn camera sees. Okay, this is what's in front of him. So I'm positioned like this way. Even if I turn my head, and you'll see I put here, even if you add 90 degrees, even if I turn my head maybe a little farther than 90 degrees, I still can't see what Melissa Perez is doing behind me. So I am completely vulnerable from the back and the side. Either way I decide to turn and look.
Okay. Travis Thompson, a little bit different view here. I like this slide. Travis Thompson's body worn cam at 2:02:06. What's the significance of this?
The significance of this is what Officer Alejandro saw, or as this was going on, as Sergeant Flores was coming over the rail. This is the attack that Melissa Perez has already begun, even before Sergeant Flores has the capability of getting over that particular rail. So now we know he was even more vulnerable because, again, remember what I said about how close the individual is based on the body-worn camera. She's actually appears a little bit closer than this. So she's very close to that window, capable of causing that serious bodily injury to Sergeant Flores had she thrown that hammer through the window. And we don't know whether she was going to throw it. We don't know whether the strike actually stopped it from going through, or whether Officer Alejandro's firing caused her to stop. But we do know that she intended to attack, and that attack actually started because her arm is coming forward and it hits that window, knocking that glass out, that very large pieces of the window towards Sergeant Flores.
So at this point, let's discuss a little bit more about that stress survival response, okay? The jury see Officer Alejandro very intently watching Melissa Perez. A few slides before here, we can see his gun is not drawn. It is still in the holster, but he has his right hand on it.
Yes.
What type of physiological effects is Officer Alejandro undergoing as he sees Melissa Perez get into this striking position so close to the window?
Again, as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, whenever that attack is coming, whenever that amount of stress, that deadly stress or the fear of an attack is coming, the body starts to change. The sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and all of those functions of the body that are not really critical at that time, like digestion and certain other functions that we don't really need, those kind of go into a sleep mode, and we hit what we call a fight or flight status. Okay, either we're going to fight and protect ourselves, or we're going to run, and all of the body's functions start to move towards that, to allow us to have the capability to respond in these situations and to become more focused, to become more aware of what's going on based on what we're paying attention to. And there are a number of physiological things that officers that are involved in a shooting will go through. Some of those are called tunnel vision. Where you focus on, and that's exactly what this shows. In a tunnel vision situation, you're not aware of anything that's going on around you. We kind of refer to that as inattentional blindness. I know that in this particular case, Sergeant Flores is right here, but I ain't looking at him. And actually, in the time that this is happening, I can't see him because my attention and my focus is narrowed down to where that particular threat is. There's also exclusions. Where your body shuts down and your hearing, while it may be enhanced just a little bit, you can actually not hear things that are going on. We've handled officer-involved shootings. I've handled officer-involved shootings multiple times where officers can't tell you how many rounds they fired, but their gun is going off 8, 9 times and you're hearing it go off. But your body excludes that information because it's not critical at that particular point for me to be able to count how many rounds I'm firing. There's a number of other effects that affect officers, and I can tell you from personal experience. I was involved in a shooting early on in my career when I came out of the academy, and I actually experienced this. I had that tunnel vision where I fired at a woman who was coming at me with a knife, but directly behind her was an EMS technician who was on scene to kind of prevent what was going on. And there was a house behind her. But the only thing that I saw was that woman coming at me. And the only thing that I saw after I fired the weapon was where the bullet struck. Because that's all your body is capable of, or all you're capable of looking at that particular time. So we see that effect here with Officer Alejandro. This is what he's looking at and this is what he sees. And I don't see anything else, and I may not even hear anything else as a result.
Next slide, Maria Salinas, 20206.
I included this slide because, again, it shows that the glass is breaking. This is a kind of a blurry vision, but there are other slides in here. I think the next one may be a little bit more clear, and you can see the size of this glass that's coming out of that window and hitting, that's possibly hitting Sergeant Flores. Now, there is something that really hasn't been discussed. We talked to you about how the glass can hurt somebody, cut somebody, cause serious bodily injury. But what we really need to kind of focus on to determine whether that's reasonable or not is, it's easy to say, but really when it happens, if I get a cut on me, is that really going to? What we don't realize, and what nobody tells us, and unless it becomes a key issue, is there are blood arteries and veins that are in your neck that are very close to the surface, and it only takes 3 millimeters of penetration.
How
from
many?
3 millimeters.
3
It's
millimeters.
like, that's like very little for one of those major arteries to be cut, and now you're looking at bleeding out within 3 or 4 minutes if you don't get emergency treatment. So these pieces of glass, had they maybe not caused that type of, the minor cuts, it is possible that those large shards of glass, had they come across with enough force, would have caused that 3 millimeters of penetration to get into one of those major veins. That's why we consider this deadly force in this particular concept, and why it's also reasonable to defend against that.
Next slide, Flores body worn camera, 20211. What do we see here?
Here we see another, and I have to emphasize here that we're looking at Melissa's intent here. Again, she's not coming out. We've known this. She's told us this at least 71 times up to this point, and now the attacks have begun. So Melissa Perez, after being fired on, after being shot at 5 times and missed by Officer Alejandro, okay, she has backed off to where she is at the couch, and then she stops. And we talk about a pause of Officer Villalobos being on top of that railing. What Melissa Perez does as well is she pauses at this particular place on the couch and then makes the intentional decision, knowing that she's been shot at 5 times, to continue the attack on the officer and start that attack again, knowing that the consequences of what's going to happen occurs. So she chooses to, I've stopped, you shot at me, you missed, I could give up, but no, I'm going to come again, and the attack begins again.
Okay. Villalobos body cam, 20211. Why is this slide significant?
We're looking at what Sergeant Flores is going to be looking at. He's looking at Melissa Perez in that apartment as she's at the back of that particular couch, okay? And before that second attack begins, that's his line of sight, what he's looking at. And I think maybe the next slide talks about that is it? No,
This
it'll.
was defense 109.
Okay, yeah. So he's looking at where she is, and here, where she is in the apartment. Here we're looking at from Travis Thompson's body-worn camera where Officer Villalobos tries that door. And again, for whatever reason, it's not opening. He can't figure it out. In 1 second, he can't figure it out. So now the events continue on.
Next slide for his body cam 20212.
I talked about Melissa Perez standing there at her apartment after she's retreated. She's actually, you can see her standing in a standing position with her arms to her side for a second or so, and then she makes that decision to attack. This is not a moving towards the door, as it says in some of the reports. This is not her rushing towards the door. Actually, Captain Van Geffen, when he reviewed the body-worn cameras of the officer's actions with the Perez family, he actually used the words that are correct. This is Melissa Perez beginning her charge. This is the position that a person takes when they begin their sprint or begin to run, and that's what she continued to do. This was a charge towards the door with bad intent.
This red arrow in the upper left-hand corner, we kind of see it, cutting off part of the door and poking out the light. What is that, Bush?
This up in the top left-hand corner here is actually Officer Villalobos' face. He's leaning into that particular part of Sergeant Flores' body-worn camera. This should give you an indication of actually how close Officer Villalobos at the time this particular attack occurred. I really can't tell you from this particular perspective whether Officer Villalobos was looking at Melissa Perez or whether he was again looking down, but I can tell you his face is this far from Sergeant Flores when that particular attack begins. And does Sergeant Flores know that?
Okay. Next frame we see, is this another illustrated example of tunnel vision?
It is. This is another example of, Sergeant Flores had that line of sight on her, and as that particular attack begins for the second time, now Sergeant Flores is, and this is probably why he didn't see Officer Villalobos' face in his field of view, or even in his camera's field of view. That tunnel vision restricts not even knowing where Officer Villalobos is at that time, much like I couldn't to tell where the EMS unit was. I'm only seeing where that threat is coming from, and this is tunnel vision.
Next slide, Villalobos body cam 20212, a different angle of that same moment.
Yeah. And I will say just briefly, tunnel vision is not a bad thing. Okay, it's not something that is. It's actually something good that allows our mind and attention to focus on that threat. So it's not bad that the officers encounter this. It's actually just a phenomenon that occurs. Here we're looking at, again, I included this particular slide in there to look at Sergeant Flores' response to this particular attack. It was shock, I believe, and you can interpret his eyes, but look how wide his eyes. He's calling out, yelling, hey, 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 or stop, whatever his comments are made at this particular point. But this is, again, shock and fear that's being registered by, reasonable shock and fear that's being registered by Sergeant Flores as that second attack begins and as it's almost upon him at that time.
Factors that are significant in measuring Chapter 9 response.
Absolutely.
Next slide. Flores body-worn camera at 2:02:13. So this is 1 second later.
This 1 second later, you've now gotten, remember how quickly you can move in a second. So she's closed that distance in less than a second, that 16 or 14 feet. She's closed that in less than a second. She's right up on the door. And you can see as that in the body-worn camera actually moving, you can see her left arm is out, okay? And in her right arm, she's got that hammer that's now coming back in, not necessarily a tomahawk this way, but it's now coming back for a swing to be come around this way as well. And this is right before Sergeant Flores fires his first shot, as she's ready to attack and she's ready to strike at that particular point.
But circling back to there was no announcement that the door wasn't working discussion. And that's what I've been wondering here. You said her left arm is out like this. Is it a reasonable belief that she would be going for that doorknob?
Absolutely. And again, remember, that door was, everybody believed that that door was unlocked. Okay. But Melissa Perez may have known that the door was locked. She's the one that locked it. So as she's approaching, if she believes that she needs to come out that door, then at least she's either reaching for the doorknob to come out the door to make the attack, or she's reaching to unlock that door before, so that she can get through it to get where she wants to be.
Tunnel vision?
Tunnel vision again, but clearly focusing on that camera is up and raised, and again, remember, body worn camera distorts the distance, so she's very, very close to that door. So anybody that's close to that door is subject to serious bodily injury or death.
Okay, next slide, 202.13.
Sergeant Flores, and we taught you that tunnel vision, okay, and he can see that her arm is up in this particular air at this particular point in time, so he believes that she's going to strike. Would a reasonable person who is about to be attacked with a hammer be justified in using self-defense or using force to defend an individual's oncoming attack of unlawful or attempted use of unlawful force? Okay, and you'll see while that hammer is up, he's firing his first shot. And if you look just right above where her arm is, you can see the indention in the door. I think there's a picture on the next slide that shows where it's gone through. You've seen that. But this is his first shot that's up while her arm is still up in this particular position.
Do you have an expert opinion whether that is immediate or apparent danger of unlawful deadly force?
It is not only apparent, it is immediate danger.
Officer Villalobos body cam at 202.13. What do we see here?
This is a continuation of Sergeant Flores' expression and response to that particular attack that was coming. You've got that wide-eyed stare that he had as Melissa Perez came towards him, and then as she gets closer, and as that hammer strike gets closer to the door, now he sees it's a startled response to that deadly force, and you'll see that now. His first shot.
You know, Butch, I just noticed something. Will you step down for me, please? Could you show the members of the jury what an officer's trained stance and position would be with a firearm to shoot? I need them to see your feet.
Okay. There are a number of stances that you can be trained with. It really just kind of depends on the officer themselves. But the majority of officers that I've seen in training, when we go to qualifications and the training classes that I've been to, this is called an isosceles stance, where you're standing with your feet about shoulder width apart. You're getting a good balance on this. Your arms are locked out in front of you to absorb that recoil and to keep that weapon steady as you fire the gun. There's other stances where you can take this stance, what's called a Weaver stance, which is kind of like a martial arts stance, where you're getting a little bit of balance and control here, and you're still doing the same thing, locking your arms out, absorbing that recoil and making the weapon steady. But you'll see a lot of officers, a majority of officers, you'll see them adopt this stance because it's the most natural, especially when there's some type of a quick or response that needs to be done quickly. It's draw and shoot, and that's what you see mostly in all of the videos here.
Just if you stay here for me and entertain me, looking at Sergeant Flores.
And you can actually see as his back curves, you can see the contact of from the middle of his back down to his butt is up against the.
Would any SAPD officer be trained to have their feet in front of their hips and be leaning back against a wall to fire?
No, absolutely not. This is one of these responses, and this is the only option that he had. He has backed himself up as far as he can to avoid that hammer strike and taken as best as he can that tactical position to fire. I'm squatting down, I'm leaning up, but I'm doing this because I got nowhere else to go. That's the only reason that this particular stance is being used here. There's nowhere else for him to go. I mean, could he stand straight up and get off the wall? Yes, but again, we're talking about his movement to avoid that particular attack, as well as I've hit the wall, there's nowhere to go, this is all I got.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. This was a scene photograph. What's the significance here, Butch?
We've seen this photograph, you might recall it from the CSI, talking about this is where Sergeant Flores' rounds hit. And as you look through you have to look very carefully. You'll see the very top, which is labeled as B1. That is Sergeant Flores' first round that goes through the door while she has her arm up in this position.
Next slide.
Okay, and this again is just a hammer swing. You can see that that hammer is no longer back here. It's starting to come down. You can see the change in the position of the hammer itself. It's being pulled back so that as that swing begins, it's in that position.
Over here on the left side of the frame, we see Officer Villalobos. Do you know Officer Villalobos' dominant hand?
He's right-handed.
Okay. Which hand is his taser in there?
His hand is in it's in his left hand at that particular point.
All right. So in order for Officer Villalobos to cycle to his firearm, he's had to take his taser from his dominant to his non-dominant hand.
Yes.
All right. In reacting to the threat of deadly force, would this transfer, does that add to Officer Villalobos' force response time?
It does. It not only adds to the time, it adds to an officer's ability to perform those functions, those kind of, we call them small functions that you have to do with your fingers and your hands. But also, this kind of shows me too, in this particular case, one of the reasons that I included this in here is we talked about the officers wanting to solve this peacefully, wanting to go in with at least the least amount of force possible, knowing that we might have to use tasers. But even after the first shots are fired, even after Officer Villalobos reaches for that door and realizes it's not over, he hasn't made at that point that decision to transfer to his weapon because he thinks that threat is occurring. He's still holding that taser, hoping to go in and accomplish what the plan was until Melissa Perez changed that. And now we're looking at, he has less than 2 seconds to, once this event starts, to transfer. He doesn't even have time to put his taser up. Or you'll see there's a picture in here in the slide that you'll see on the video where he's got the taser and the gun in the same hand at the same time. He's not been able to make that full transition because of the time it takes to draw and fire in his mind.
Next slide, 202:14, 1 second later.
This is, as you can see, Melissa Perez's arm has come down in that particular attempt to strike. This is Sergeant Flores' second shot, and if you look closely, just below the first shot, there's an indentation in the door. You'll see it in the crime scene photograph next time, but you can see where the second indentation into the door panel is. We know this is Sergeant Flores' second shot, and again, at this point, Officer Villalobos has not had time to transition from his taser to his weapon. That is an ongoing process. You know, there is studies out there and information out there that tells us how long an officer has to have a response time. That's the time that he sees a threat and react to that threat to where the body actually begins a movement. And that's about 0.56 seconds, okay? Before that I realize the threat is coming, I have to draw my weapon. Just the time I have to start moving to do that is the time that's there. Now, I also have to draw my weapon from a level 3 protection holster. And that level 3 means there are 3 levels of security on the holster that you have to defeat before you can draw your weapon. And we're looking at about 1.5 to 1.6 seconds for that to happen from a level 3 holster to get on target. So if you're wondering why it took Officer Villalobos 2 seconds to get to that point, he realized the threat was there. He made the determination to fire, take into consideration his response time and the time it takes him to draw, and it matches up accurately from what you're seeing in the video.
And just for the jury's benefit, that level 3 of a holster, that's to protect the gun from falling out, protect people from taking it out unwillingly, things like that.
Yes, there are actually 3 security issues in the holster that prevent it from being taken away from you.
Next slide, scene photo.
B2 is actually the second shot from Sergeant Flores. We've already seen that as it goes through the door and strikes Melissa Perez.
Next slide, Flores body cam 202:14.
You've seen, and it's really hard to see because you want to believe that Sergeant Flores' third shot is what knocked all of the glass out of the window. That's not what happened. His third shot actually goes through, and there's a better picture of it in a second here, but it actually goes right here. You can see the hole that his third shot made. It does shatter the glass because this is that tempered glass that as soon as it hits it breaks, but it doesn't actually, the glass is actually knocked out by Officer Villalobos trying to get through the door.
So, moving to that better frame of the door, there's some other interesting things in this at 202:16 on Flores body cam. What do we see now on the left side of the frame?
What we see now is you've got Officer Villalobos has already drawn his weapon, and as you can see, Melissa Perez is not visible in the door, nor is she visible in the window. And you can see where his weapon is pointed. Melissa Perez is behind this very small wall here, and he knows that that's where she's at. He can't see her, but he knows she's there, and he knows that she's still armed with that hammer.
And then over here on the right side of the frame, Officer or Sergeant Flores is doing what with his left arm?
Honestly, I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
Something like this?
Yeah, I'm sorry. If you look at his uniform, the two stripes that you see there, you can see his sergeant stripes on the top part of the shoulder here. But we also have stripes on our uniform to show the amount of years of service that we have, and that's these two stripes here. And you can see those two stripes are up in front of his head at this particular point.
Okay, the next slide, we're going back in time 7 seconds, 2:02:09 on Nathaniel's body worn camera. Why was this significant?
Well, you're looking at, again, after Alejandro's first shots, we still has Officer Villalobos with the taser in his hand. His intent is to still go through that door, make it through the door to arrest Melissa Perez as peacefully. I know that peacefully sounds terrible, but that's this, as with using as least amount of force as possible to get her under control. So Officer Villalobos still is here hoping that he can get through that. But what you see is Melissa Perez has retreated back to her couch, and she's bent over the couch. She's not hit at this point, okay, but she's bent over the couch, and that's what I talk about. She bends over, she stands up, she gets herself together again, and now that second attack happens. This is right before that occurs.
We got a few slides left. The next slide, Villalobos body cam 2:02:15.
Yes, this is the beginning of Officer Villalobos' shots. As you can actually see, as I mentioned before, he still has his taser in his left hand, and now he's got his weapon in his right hand. I haven't had time in that very short period of time to make that complete transaction, but I know there's a threat. I know that threat is behind this very small section of the wall. That threat is capable of either coming through that door on his right or coming through that window on his left. But I know where she's at, and that threat is ongoing. So we need to stop that threat. You can see his weapon is pointed directly in the middle of this particular wall, about 6 planks up, which is where Melissa Perez's upper body would have been, and his intent was to stop that particular threat as it came through.
So going to that 6 planks up, the next slide, crime scene photo we have in evidence. The significance was the 3-shot pattern on that center wall. Why?
The 3-shot pattern is within that 5 and 6 plank count as you go up. This is where those shots would have hit center mass.
Which states exhibit number 63 included on your final slide. Is that 6 plank where we see those center mass shots?
Yes, you've got 2 in number 6 and 1 in number 5, which would have been center mass.
Okay. Butch, I want to transition a little bit to talk about capturing that eyewitness testimony, right? Taking statements. This is something you teach a course in.
I do.
We heard a little bit from Detective Platt. He said, well, I don't want to ask any questions. I don't want to do any additional investigation. Just put down what you think you need to put down, and that's what we'll do.
Yep.
Do you see any issues in that from an investigative expert's standpoint?
Absolutely.
And what are those issues?
So one of the things that I've always taught, even when I was at the San Antonio Police Department and teaching individuals how to take statements, is taking statements is not just a mere recitation of facts. You don't have somebody sit down and say, tell me what happened, because it's human nature for those individuals to only tell you what they think is important or what they remember in after a very traumatic event. memory is really funny. You can remember some things, you can remember not some things. All those hot spots stay in your mind. I very clearly remember what happened to me in my very first shooting, because those hot spots, I don't remember all of it, but I remember the hot spots that I can tell you about because those are in my brain. But in taking a statement, one of the things that you don't do is tell me what happens. And when I was a sergeant with the police department, and even now in my agency, I refuse to allow my detectives, and refuse then to allow my detectives to use what the detectives are doing today is handing a witness or handing a victim or handing an officer a statement and says, write down what you remember or write down what happened. I could give you an example. I did that on one shooting, or it was done on one shooting. I used the example in my class where the response came back, saw the shooting, that's all. Okay, that's what happened in a handwritten statement, because that's all the person thought he wanted to talk about. But in taking statements from officer-involved shootings, one of the purposes, as you've heard from Sergeant Miller, determine the truth. And in my classes and in my teaching, I have to ask me something. It's not on you. It's my responsibility as an investigator. I'm tasked with the task of determining whether or not this officer was justified, whether there were any defenses, whether there are affirmative defenses, if there's any reason that criminal charges shouldn't be filed in this particular case. That's on me to find out. And I can't find that out if I don't ask questions. I remember during testimony, a statement was made, well, Sergeant Flores didn't tell you anything about, now I drew another blank.
Bedridden old man.
He didn't tell you anything about the bedridden old man. He didn't tell you anything. Sergeant Flores' responsibility to first possible to remember every single thing that happens in a particular situation, especially a traumatic situation. There's actions that are taught out there that teach how to get that information from individuals who are witnesses or who've been involved in a traumatic event. One of them is a cognitive interview process where you ask them what happened, and then you go back and you ask questions to clarify, and then you go back and have them tell you what happened from backwards to forwards. All of that stimulates the brain to recall certain events, and you're looking for specific information to address questions. Why did you fire at this particular point, officer? Okay, the answer you're going to get from most police officers is, I was in fear for my life. Okay, a legitimate reason to fire. But when we're trying to determine whether justification exists, the next question should be, why were you in fear? What factors did you see? What was occurring at that point that caused you to be in fear for your life, to justify that statement? And that process has to be done throughout the taking of the statement. You can't just sit there and say, tell me what you want. It's my job to find that out, to draw it out, because that's the purpose of that particular investigation. And that was not done here in any way, shape, or form.
Judge.
All right, let's go ahead and take a short break.
All rise for the jury.
Please be seated.
Huh?
Judy, go to the restroom.
Yeah, I do.
You can.
Okay.